Let's get to our political panel. Of course, the Khaki election campaign continues on this Anzac Day 2022. Emma Dawson, Executive Director at the think tank Per Capita, former Labor advisor, and former New South Wales Liberal Party leader Kerry Chikarovski with me as well. Kerry, what was your take on Peter Dutton's comments about needing to prepare for war to preserve the peace? The Prime Minister warning about a red line, crossing the red line if China were to build a military base in the Solomons. The strong language continues.
Well, I think, Kieran, this was always going to be a election in which national security, played a part. I think the surprising thing is that in some ways we all thought it would be because of people's concerns about Ukraine and Russia. And I think there are very strong and genuine concerns about that ongoing drama in Europe. I think people at this level, in Australia, aren't affected on a personal level on a day-to-day basis, but I think they are genuinely concerned about the aggression of the Putin government and what that might mean for the rest of Europe, and what, if Europe ends up in a massive conflict, what that would do to us. So I think it was always going to come into play. I think what Peter Dutton is saying, that we have greater concerns as well, and obviously the Prime Minister is saying that we have greater concerns in our immediate area. So the Pacific, which is our doorstep, people here are much more cognisant of the Solomon Islands, of Fiji, of PNG. A lot of us have been to a lot of those places on a regular basis. So I think people are more concerned now about what might be happening with China. Now, I accept that there'll be very different views on what the government should or shouldn't have done in relation to the Solomon Islands deal. But I think the thing we need to keep in mind is that the Prime Minister has a track record of standing up to China. He was the first world leader, for example, to lead the charge for an investigation into how the COVID epidemic started. Where did it come out of Wuhan? What happened in Wuhan? And he did so at great personal cost in many ways. He was attacked as you would remember, very vigorously by the Chinese government. But, he has that reputation, as did Tony Abbott, to standing up to Putin. So I think there is a coalition strength which these issues will actually play to in the election.
Emma Dawson, from if you put your political strategist cap on, is it a negative for Labor that any time we're talking about these issues, even if it is, an adverse outcome on this government's watch, that being that security pact between the Solomons and China?
No, I don't think it is or has to be a negative for Labor. I think while, you're clearly alluding to the fact that there's a belief or a widespread belief in the community that the coalition's stronger on international relations and on national security. But if you actually look at what's occurring here, what's happened is really a failure of Australia's diplomacy in the Pacific region. And the reason Labor needn't be afraid of this as an issue is because it has a very strong team in this regard. Penny Wong is very, very well regarded in the region, very well regarded across the Asia Pacific and in the Pacific, and she has an absolute mastery of her portfolio. Richard Marles, the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party, published an essay in August last year called Tides That Bind Asia in the Pacific, in which he talked about the need for us to engage much more deeply, much more carefully in our region. There are 10 million people living in the Pacific, and Australia has always had its clearest and loudest voice in international relations in our own region. So no, Labor knows what it's doing in this regard. And I think while Kerry's right to say, Morrison, our Prime Minister, was one of the first to call out China when the pandemic hit, it wasn't done in a particularly diplomatic way. And what we're seeing happen in the Pacific now is actually a failure of international relations and diplomacy. It doesn't really matter how much you stand up to the strong men of the world in your rhetoric if you don't do the hard work of engaging in the region. And I think that's what we can see has failed here.